The vintage Cabernet dripped from my eyelashes, staining my vision red. I stood center stage in the ballroom of the Sterling estate. Smelling the expensive lilies and the metallic tang of wine, my sister Savannah was smiling behind her hand. She thought this was her victory. She thought humiliating me was the final touch to her perfect day. She didn't know that the man she had just called a thief owned the ground beneath her satin heels, and she definitely didn't know that the contract she was celebrating on had my signature at the bottom. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I wiped the wine from my eyes and walked to the microphone. I was about to cost my parents $350,000 with 4 words. Before I tell you what happened when the handcuffs came out, tell me in the comments. Have you ever let someone mistreat you just to keep the peace? I want to know who else is done being silent. 5 minutes earlier, the air in the ballroom had been thick with the scent of expensive lilies and even more expensive perfume. My sister Savannah stood at the head table, raising her glass for what was supposed to be a toast to family unity. She looked like a porcelain doll in her custom lace gown, the very picture of innocence. I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, trying to make myself invisible in my simple navy dress, holding onto the arm of my husband, Caleb. Then came the stumble. It was theatrical, almost comedic in its clumsiness. Savannah lurched forward, and the contents of her glass, a $500 bottle of vintage Cabernet, arced through the air. It hit me squarely in the face. The cold liquid splashed into my eyes, ran down my neck and soaked into the fabric of my dress, turning it a deep, violent purple. The room went dead silent. For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of wine dripping onto the marble floor. Then a giggle broke the tension. It started from the bridesmaid's table and rippled outward. Savannah covered her mouth with a manicured hand, her eyes dancing with malicious delight. "Oh no," she said, her voice devoid of any real apology. "I am so clumsy." Preston, her new husband, didn't even try to hide his smirk. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his own drink. "Don't worry, babe," he said loud enough for the back row to hear. "At least now she matches the carpet. Trash always finds its level." I stood there, blinking the sting from my eyes. In that moment, the last thread of obligation I felt toward these people snapped. I am Malene Vance, 29 years old, a landscape architect who builds ecosystems from nothing. I deal with storms, erosion, and rot for a living. I know exactly when a foundation is too cracked to save. This wasn't an accident. It was a public execution of my dignity, designed to put me back in the little box they had built for me since childhood. I didn't cry. The tears my mother was expecting never came. Instead, a cold, metallic clarity settled over me. I reached up and wiped the wine from my cheek with a slow, deliberate motion. I felt Caleb tense beside me, his muscles coiling like he was about to launch himself at Preston. But I placed a hand on his chest. "Wait," I whispered. I walked toward the stage. The band leader, looking terrified, stepped back as I approached. I took the microphone from the stand. The feedback wed for a second, cutting through the murmurs of the 300 guests. "This party is over," I said. My voice didn't shake. It echoed off the vated ceilings, flat and final. To my right stood the centerpiece of Savannah's vanity, a 7F'd champagne tower stacked with hundreds of crystal coups glowing under the spotlights. It was worth $15,000, a shimmering monument to excess. I looked at it, then I looked at my sister. With one calm, deliberate shove, I pushed the base. The sound was apocalyptic. It wasn't just glass breaking. It was a thunderclap of destruction. Thousands of shards exploded outward. A waterfall of crystal and expensive champagne crashing onto the hardwood. The noise was so loud it was physical, vibrating in the chests of everyone in the room. Silence followed absolute, stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Savannah's mouth hung open, her face draining of color. Preston looked like he had been slapped. I didn't wait for their reaction. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. I turned and walked back to Caleb, grabbing his rough, calloused hand. "Let's go," I said. I thought I had made my point. I thought we were leaving. I didn't know the doors were already being locked. We reached the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall. I pushed against the brass handles. They didn't budge. I pushed harder, panic fluttering in my chest for the first time. Through the frosted glass, I saw the dark, immovable shapes of private security guards standing firm on the other side. Then came Preston's voice, booming over the speakers, distorted by rage. "Nobody leaves." I turned around. Preston was standing on the stage, his white tuxedo jacket stained with champagne, pointing a shaking finger at us. "Lock the perimeter!" he screamed to the security team lining the walls. "I want the sheriff here now." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It wasn't a party anymore. It was a courtroom, and we were the defendants. The guests, who moments ago were whispering about the spilled wine, now formed a solid wall of judgment, cutting off any other escape route. Preston wasn't done. He knew he couldn't hold us just for breaking a few glasses. He needed something stickier. He needed a crime. He looked at Caleb at his rough hands and simple suit, and he saw his opportunity. "That man is a thief!" Preston shouted, his voice carrying to the back rows. I saw him taking silverware from the tables. I saw him going through coats in the cloakroom. He's stealing from my guests. A gasp rippled through the crowd. It was a lie. A blatant, disgusting lie. But looking around at the sea of senators and old money, I saw the heads nodding. They believed him. Of course they believed him. Preston was a vice president, a man in a tuxedo. Caleb looked like the help. And her? Preston pointed at me, his eyes wild. That was assault. She threw glass at my wife. That is a violent attack with a weapon. Call Sheriff Miller. Tell him I want them both in cuffs before the cake is cut. My parents were standing near the front. My mother, Cynthia, had her hand over her mouth, looking horrified, not at Preston, but at the scene I was causing. My father, Richard, was staring at his shoes. They didn't move. They didn't step forward to say, "That's our daughter." They stood by the man who was hunting me. I looked at them, really looked at them, and I felt a strange burning sensation in my chest. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. People always ask, "Why did you stay? Why did you let them treat you like this for so long?" They don't understand how it works. They don't break you in a day. They grind you down. It's the frog in the boiling water. When you grow up being told that your existence is a burden, that your needs are selfish, and that your pain is an inconvenience, you don't notice the temperature rising. You think the heat is love. You think the scalding water is just how family feels. I didn't leave when they forgot my graduation. I didn't leave when they made me pay for my own birthday dinner. I stayed because I was trained to be the shock absorber for their dysfunction. I was trained to be grateful that they even let me in the pot. But looking at Preston's twisted face and my parents' cowardice, I realized the truth. The water wasn't just hot anymore. It was boiling and I was done cooking. Caleb stepped in front of me, shielding me from the stairs. His body was tense, a wall of protective anger. "Let them call," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Let them bring the law into this." We were trapped in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by 300 people who wanted to see us destroyed. The air was thick with judgment and the smell of spilled wine. Preston was smiling again, tapping on his phone, summoning the handcuffs that he thought would end me. He didn't know he was dialing his own destruction. The silence in the ballroom was heavier than the crystal I'd just shattered. We were standing in a circle of judgment, me, Caleb, and the security guards blocking the doors while the guests whispered behind their hands. It felt like an execution waiting to happen. My mother, Cynthia, broke the line. She marched over to me, her face contorted with a mix of fury and panic. She grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin through the wine-soaked fabric of my dress. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "How could you ruin your sister's day? After everything we did for you, after we paid a fortune for this venue," I looked at her and for the first time, I didn't see a mother. I saw a fraud. "We paid for this," she repeated, her voice shaking. "We paid $350,000. I almost laughed. It would have been a bitter, ugly sound because that was the lie that held this entire family together. The fiction that my parents were wealthy benefactors and I was the charity case. The truth was darker. 6 months ago, we sat in the leasing office of the Sterling estate. The coordinator had looked at my father's credit report and frowned. Tax liens, bad debt, a history of late payments. They wouldn't rent to him. They wouldn't even take his check. They needed a primary sponsor, someone with clean credit and liquid assets to assume full liability. My father had looked at me, desperate. "Maddie, please just sign it." "Well, wire you the money. Don't let Savannah lose this." So, I did. I signed. And when their wire transfer got delayed for the deposit, I wrote the check. $25,000 from my own savings. Non-refundable. I paid for the privilege of being treated like a servant at my own sister's wedding. I never asked for it back because I knew they didn't have it. I let them play rich while I paid the bill. "You didn't pay for everything, Mom," I said, my voice low. "You know you didn't." She flinched, her eyes darting around to see if anyone heard. "Ungrateful." She spat just like your husband. She turned her glare to Caleb. He was standing perfectly still, his face impassive, watching the doors. Preston, feeling emboldened by my mother's anger, stepped closer. He pointed at Caleb's hands that were rough, calloused, and permanently stained with the dark earth of the fields he worked every day. "Look at him." Preston sneered, addressing his groomsmen. "Look at those hands. He probably digs ditches for a living. I bet he hasn't washed them in a week. No wonder he's stealing silverware. He probably thinks a fork is a year's salary." The groomsmen laughed. It was a cruel, elitist sound. I looked at Caleb's hands. I knew those hands. I knew how they felt when he planted the first vines of the season. I knew how they built the automated irrigation systems that revolutionized water conservation in the valley. They laughed at the dirt under his fingernails, too blind to realize that the dirt they mocked was worth more than their entire lineage. They saw a laborer. They didn't see the empire he built from that soil. They thought they were trapping a rat. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in a cage with a lion. "Keep talking, Preston," I thought, a cold calm washing over me. "Dig the hole deeper, because when the dirt finally hits you, you won't be able to breathe." I pulled my phone from my clutch, my fingers flying across the screen. I wasn't calling for help. I was pulling up the PDF. The lease agreement, the document that proved I wasn't just a guest, I was the legal entity that controlled this space. "You don't want to do this, Preston," I said, stepping forward. "You really don't." Preston laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. "I'm the client, Malene. My parents wired $325,000 to this venue. I own this room. I own the air you're breathing. Your parents wired the money," I corrected him, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my veins. "But who signed the contract?" "Preston." "Who is the primary signatory?" He blinked, confused for a microsecond. "You couldn't sign. Your credit was leveraged on that new condo. Mom and Dad couldn't sign because of the tax liens. I signed legally. I am the client. You are just a guest, and guests can be removed." For a second, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He knew I was the type to keep receipts. He knew I handled the paperwork because nobody else in this family could be bothered to read the fine print. But then the double doors swung open and the sheriff walked in. Sheriff Miller wasn't just a lawman, he was Preston's golf partner. I'd seen them high-fiving at the club grill more times than I could count. He walked into the ballroom with the swagger of a man who knew exactly who paid his campaign donations. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at the shattered glass or the wine soaking my dress. He looked straight at Preston. "Preston, son," Miller said, hitching up his belt. Security said, "You've got a situation." Preston's confidence came rushing back. He pointed a finger at Caleb like a weapon. "Sheriff, thank God. These two are trespassing. They destroyed property, assaulted my wife and him." He jabbed the finger closer to Caleb's face. I caught him stuffing silverware into his pockets. "Grand larceny. He's stealing from my guests." It was such an absurd, cartoonish lie that I actually gasped. Caleb, a man who built an empire from the dirt up, stealing forks. But Miller didn't ask for proof. He didn't ask for a witness. He just turned his cold, heavy gaze onto my husband. He saw the work boots. He saw the tan skin. He saw a man who didn't look like the senators and bankers filling the room. "Is that right?" Miller said, his hand dropping to his belt. "Stealing silver." I saw him take a wallet, too, Savannah chimed in from the head table, wiping fake tears from her eyes. Please, just get him out of here. He's scaring me. That was all Miller needed. He stepped into Caleb's space, aggressive and looming. Turn around, son. Hands behind your back. He didn't do anything. I screamed, stepping between them. This is a lie. I have the contract right here. I am the step aside, ma'am. Miller barked, not even making eye contact. Read the contract. I shoved my phone toward him, the screen glowing with the venue's letterhead. I am the lay. You cannot arrest my guest based on Miller's hand lashed out. He didn't take the phone. He backhanded it. The device flew out of my grip, skidding across the polished floor and sliding under a table. The sound of it hitting the wood felt like a bone breaking. I don't care about your PDF, Missy, Miller spat. I care about the man stealing silver from a wedding. He grabbed Caleb's shoulder and spun him around. Caleb didn't fight. He didn't resist. He let himself be manhandled, his face a mask of terrifying calm. Click. The handcuffs snapped shut, the sound echoing through the silent ballroom. My husband, the man who built schools and transformed sustainable farming, was bent over a table like a criminal in front of 300 guests. There, Preston said, fixing his tie. That's better. Savannah laughed, raising her glass. Finally, someone took the trash out. I looked at my mother. She knew it was a lie. She knew Caleb hadn't stolen anything. She met my eyes, then turned away and sipped her wine. The betrayal crushed the air from my lungs. I had the truth, the receipts, the moral high ground, and none of it mattered. The corrupt network had won. They were about to drag my husband away and ruin him while the cake was cut behind me. Sheriff Miller grabbed Caleb's arm. Let's go. You can explain it to the judge. Then the service doors burst open. Stop. Mr. Henderson, the estate's general manager, sprinted in, pale and frantic. Unhand him. He shouted, Sheriff, are you insane? He's a thief. The sheriff snapped. A thief? Henderson shoved himself between them. That man is Caleb Sterling. He bought this estate last Tuesday. The room froze. Preston went gray. That's a lie. By the owner is a blind trust which he controls. Henderson barked, pulling out the master key. Unlock him now. The cuffs clicked open. Caleb straightened his jacket, calm and immovable. Get out of my sight, he told the sheriff, who retreated instantly. Caleb faced Preston. You accused me of stealing from my own dining room. I didn't know, Preston whispered. Exactly, Caleb said. You judged what you didn't understand. He turned to Henderson. We have trespassers. Preston screamed about contracts and money. I stepped forward, holding up my phone. You never read the terms, I said. Clause 14 voids the contract if police are involved without cause. All funds are forfeited. My mother begged. I looked at her calmly. It's the penalty for your cruelty. I turned to Caleb. Enforce it. Security moved fast. When Preston lunged and threatened me, Caleb nodded to the sheriff. That's criminal trespass. Arrest him. This time the cuffs went on Preston. Minutes later, the ballroom was empty. Caleb asked what I wanted done with the forfeited money. Donate it, I said, to legal aid for survivors of financial abuse. In Savannah's name, we drove away into the night. My phone buzzed. I blocked every number. They wanted a show. I gave them a finale.